Marking the 25th anniversary of the legendary Woodstock Music Festival in 1969, Woodstock 94 took place in New York State, with a 3-day program covering a wide range of genres and acts including mainstream rock, blues, country, grunge, hip-hop, jazz fusion, EDM and spoken word poetry, with several performers returning from the original 1969 lineup including Santana, Joe Cocker, The Band, Crosby, Stills and Nash, and surviving members of Sweetwater, Hot Tuna and the Grateful Dead. Unfortunately, the weather was not kind to the concert, which quickly gained the name Mudstock. On the same day the festival opened, a strike by players resulted in the cancellation of the Baseball World Series for the first time since 1904. The strike was in direct response to a proposed salary cap on players by team owners, who were suffering from a worsening financial situation, but the Players Association, the MLBPA, and MLB itself had been at loggerheads for years over a number of issues, especially accusations of owners colluding over what wages were being offered to free agents. In 1992, League Commissioner Fay Vincent had told the owners collectively that they had stolen $280 million from the players, and was forced to resign as a result and had not yet been replaced. Following the death of John Smith, the British Labour Party's leadership election had seen a contest between Smith's deputy and current caretaker leader Margaret Beckett, John Prescott, the Welsh-born Yorkshireman who was seen as representing the traditional working-class left, and Tony Blair, a younger candidate representing the more centrist popular wing of the party. The deputy leadership was also contested between the three, with Blair winning the leadership and Prescott the deputy leadership. Some were surprised that high-profile Shadow Chancellor Gordon Brown hadn't thrown his hat into the ring, and it would emerge much later that he and Blair had met at a London restaurant and agreed that Brown would not contest the election, with Blair promising him the chancellorship if he won the subsequent general election, due in 1997. And on the 11th of August, the world bade farewell to Peter Cushing, whose wide-ranging acting career encompassed Sherlock Holmes, Doctor Who — he played the title role in a pair of 1960s movies — Laurence Olivier's Hamlet, and starring roles in a series of horror movies made by the Hammer Studio throughout the 1960s and 70s, often playing Van Helsing opposite Christopher Lee's Dracula. In later years he became known for his role as Grand Moff Tarkin in 1977's Star Wars, and a cameo role in 1984 spy spoof Top Secret, though his last cinema role was in 1986's Biggles' Adventures in Time, which is hardly a classic, but I love it. The F1 teams arrived in Hungary 2 weeks after Hockhenheim, during which time Mika Hakkinen had been found at fault for one of the 2 start line accidents, and his suspended one-race ban had been unsuspended, so test driver and Peugeot man Philippe Alliot would deputise. Car number 7, Philippe Alliot. After driving 14 races and scoring 2 points for LaRousse in 1993, Alliot had stepped aside to allow pay drivers to take the wheel in the last 2 races, and spent 1994 driving sports cars, coming third at Le Mans for the Peugeot Sport team, co-driving with the Lions man at McLaren, Jean-Pierre Jabouille. Jabouille had pushed him strongly for the number 8 car, but Ron Dennis was unimpressed by his credentials and went with Martin Brundle instead, an early source of discord between McLaren and Peugeot. After celebrating his 40th birthday just before the German Grand Prix, Alliot seems realistic though, saying that he's regarding driving the McLaren in a race as an achievement in itself, and recognising that it's been nearly a year since he last drove a full Grand Prix race distance. Elsewhere, there had been various reactions to the Benetton pit fire across the paddock. Many were questioning whether the reintroduction of refuelling itself should be reconsidered, though Ferrari's Jean Todt remained a committed supporter, not least because his car's thirsty V12 engines were one of the chief beneficiaries. And with Ferrari now having a veto on rule changes, that seemed to be that. Elf proposed that all fuel stops should now be 20 seconds, which would reduce the rush on mechanics, a proposal roundly ignored by everyone else, while Benetton and others beefed up the fireproof protection on their crews. Meanwhile, the inquest into the fire continued, with the central issue continuing to be Benetton's removal of the foreign object filter and who did or didn't authorise it. Rumours went around that other teams had also removed the filter, with LaRousse often cited as having told other teams they'd been okayed to do so, while, as the teams set up for the race on Thursday, Benetton pointed to Antotechnique engineers modifying refuelling nozzles and concluded that the firm had discovered a fault in the equipment which therefore absolved them.
The filter wasn't in the rig originally when they were supplied by the FIA. It was put in later to stop swarf from the construction of the rig going into the car's fuel tank. When we found that we were getting no more debris through, we went to the FIA delegate and asked him if it was possible to remove the filter because it was serving no purpose. He asked us why we were wishing to do so. We said because obviously it would improve the fuel flow and you're looking for fractions of a second. He considered it and gave us permission to remove the filter. In our team manager Jean Villedeprat requested permission from FIA delegate Mr. Charlie Whiting. I don't think it has any bearing on the pit lane fire we had at Hockhenheim. I think we can prove conclusively that it had no impact on that whatsoever.
Do you have an alternative theory then about what caused it?
We believe that there was possibly a faulty component in the valve, and that coupled up to possibly the temperature on the day and the fact that the car stopped about half a metre further than it should have done were probably all contributing factors. The main one probably is an oversized component within the fuel valve. We've checked a dozen fuel valves here this weekend, and they all have 5 times the clearance, operating clearance of the valve that was taken out of Verstappen's car at Hockhenheim.
Looking at the bigger picture, Benetton were now at the centre of 2 investigations into alleged cheating, and the FIA hadn't exactly been in prisoner-taking mood before Imola, as Eddie Irvine would attest. So Benetton were now summoned to appear before the next World Council meeting on the 19th of October, which was before they all jetted out for Japan, with sources saying that it wasn't impossible that the team could be kicked out of the 1994 season, which in turn alarmed not just Benetton, but many of those concerned about the sport's commercial viability. After Imola, a cheating scandal involving a top team and the controversy of taking the title away from a first-time champion could be really serious. In the more immediate future, things were not looking great for the upcoming Italian Grand Prix at Monza, where the circuit modifications were not going to be finished in time. The GPDA was in a difficult position. Some wanted to cancel the event, others wanted to make the trip anyway. Schumacher was quite open that he wanted to cancel because the fewer races there were, the better his title chances. Alesi and Hill, understandably, wanted to race, and of course the 2 heads of the GPDA, Gerhard Berger and Niki Lauda, were both Ferrari employees, which complicated things even more. Michele Alboreto had already fallen out with the GPDA, believing the pit lane speed limit should remain at 80 kph, and that the organisation shouldn't have accepted the increase to 120 from Magny-Cours onwards. But on the other hand, the ex-Ferrari driver was also keen to race at Monza. Niki Lauda was rather scathing about it. "I can't tell if he's suddenly aged, which would prevent him from reasoning, or if he's gone mad. On the one hand, he's making a big fuss about 40 kilometres more or less in the pits, and on the other, he wants to race at Monza." Lauda had actually had a narrow escape the week before the race, when he'd been in a jet ski accident near his Ibiza estate. With 3 broken ribs, things could have ended up very badly indeed, without the efforts of his 13-year-old son Matthias, who pulled him back to the beach. Niki was in Hungary anyway, but if he was more than usually cranky, maybe that was why. The weather in Hungary in mid-August is usually sweltering, but on Friday morning there was a downpour that washed all the dust off the little-used track. The wet session was also enlivened when a dog got onto the track in front of Hill's car, but even once the sun had emerged in the afternoon in time for qualifying, grip was pretty precarious, not helped by the new technical regulations on this high downforce circuit. 54 spins were recorded across Friday and Saturday, with lap times on average 4 seconds a lap slower than last year. Michael Schumacher had taken 2 weeks off between races to clear his mind after Hockenheim, and he was back on form to take provisional pole on Friday, ahead of Hill, Coulthard, an excellent Brundle, Berger and Verstappen. Most times came down on Saturday as grip improved, though the Dutchman came a cropper and couldn't better his time and dropped down the order. At the end of Saturday, it was clear then that the Benetton was the car to have in Hungary despite Verstappen's issues, while Hill remained just over half a second off Michael's time to line up second, with Coulthard third, his best ever grid position and not bad for a Hungaroring first-timer, but he was still nearly 2 seconds off pole. The Ferrari was understeering, which suited Berger, 4th, but didn't suit Alesi, 13th. Katayama repeated his fantastic form from Hockenheim to line up 5th again, on a circuit that could hardly be more different from the forests of Germany, with Brundle enjoying his brief stint as lead McLaren driver in 6th. The Jordans and Saubers were also suffering from understeer too, with Irvine and Frentzen 7th and 8th, getting more out of the cars than Barrichello and De Cesaris 10th and 17th. Panis followed up his second place in Germany with his best ever qualifying in 9th, while Bernard spent a long time in the pits with a dud gearbox and could only manage 18th. Alio went off early on and seemed to lose confidence, lining up a disappointed 14th alongside a lazy, while most of the Ford engine cars, which might have been expected to do better here, were having handling issues. David Brabham had a great session, lining up 23rd ahead of a deeply disillusioned Johnny Herbert, who called his Lotus 109 a catastrophe. Beretta, for his part, could only manage 25th with more gearbox problems, while Gounon just couldn't get his car working right and came within 7/10 of losing out to Bertrand Gachot, with Belmondo back to normal service 2.5 seconds adrift of his own teammate. Sunday was warm and sunny, though a stiff breeze kept temperatures pleasant as the cars assembled on the grid, with a decent crowd as usual, including strong contingents from nearby Austria and Germany, but also Finns who'd been left with nobody to support this weekend and were waving banners urging Benetton to put Leto back in the number 6 car. The red lights went green and Panis shot off the line slightly early, while Hill made a good start but couldn't nick the lead into turn 1 as Schumacher went round the outside. Further back, Irvine got squeezed between Katayama and Barrichello, and all three wound up in the gravel trap. Another double DNF at the first corner for Eddie Jordan, and another wasted qualifying effort for Katayama. So at the end of lap 1, Schumacher led Hill and Coulthard, followed by Berger, Brundle and Panis, a very fast starting Alesi, Frentzen, Verstappen and Blundell making up the top 10. Schumacher and Hill were already pulling away from Coulthard, while at the back both Brabham and Herbert had made fantastic starts and were now 17th and 18th respectively from 23rd and 24th on the grid. As the opening laps developed, Coulthard began to pull away from Berger, as Schumacher pulled slowly away from Hill, while Zanardi, who'd dropped to the back with a misfiring Mugen, came in to have it looked at on lap 5. By lap 9, Schumacher had the lead out to 3 seconds and was taking a second a lap off Hill, while Alesi was dancing around behind Panis, who had been adjudged to have jumped the start but for some reason was not given any penalty other than a verbal reprimand at the end of the race. On lap 11, Zanardi was back in, his engine still not right, and sat there for a few minutes while the technicians tried something else, then sent him back out again, while Gounon came in to retire his Simtech, considering it undrivable and sensibly preferring to give it up as a bad job before he had an accident. Panis was by now leading a little clump of cars, with Alesi, Frentzen and Verstappen now all champing at the bit to get past the Ligier, whose occupant made a couple of small errors and seemed to lose confidence a bit, allowing Alesi to bully his way past on lap 13 and immediately put some fresh air between himself and his fellow Frenchman. By now Schumacher was 8 seconds ahead of Hill and was just starting to encounter the first of the stragglers in the shapes of Beretta, Fittipaldi and Bernard, with Herbert just beyond. Fittipaldi, concentrating on the Ligier ahead of him, was proving an obstacle, and on lap 17 Benetton brought Schumacher in for his first stop, coming in just as De Cesaris and Comas left in formation ahead of him. Benetton had doubtless been practising pit stop drills since Hockhenheim, and this one was a cracker, 7.5 seconds, but not enough to get him out ahead of Hill, who now took over the lead, as well as traffic problems of his own. Bernard, already being considerably outshone by Panis here, continued his woes by going off and bumping down the hill, but he didn't seem to have done anything untoward to his car. That got one car out from in front of Damon, but now it was his turn to be held up by Fittipaldi, who was now trying to overtake Herbert rather than Bernard, but it was Coulthard rather than Hill who was first in. Damon finally got by the Herbert-Fittipaldi scrap, but the Williams stayed out, with Schumacher having caught back up to 10 seconds behind, but once more he had the backmarkers to deal with again, while Hill had a clear track and could put his foot down. Alio's race was run on lap 22, a ruptured water hose causing his Peugeot to overheat, as the cameras found Schumacher making his way through the backmarkers. Finally, on lap 25 of the 77, Hill peeled in for his fuel stop, a long 10 seconds, getting him out well behind Schumacher, as Verstappen and Brabham, now going great guns in 13th, also made their stops. That was about a third distance, which was exactly when Hill would be expected to stop for a 2-stop race, which raised the question of whether Benetton had planned 3 stops, or altered their strategy on the fly, and would then either switch to doing 3, or make a long second stop and have a long final stint. Time would tell. Berger hadn't stopped yet, and was evidently just as frustrated getting through traffic, giving Beretta a fist shake once past, but he was on a single stop today and would just have to put up with it for a bit longer. De Cesaris, who'd been very well behaved in the traffic, it must be said, put a wheel off while running 16th and spun on the way down to turn 2, and collected Morbidelli, who couldn't avoid him, and both cars ended up beached, and out came the yellows, while Gianni's teammate Christian was still trying to get past Herbert, who was putting on a great display of defensive tactics, aided by a grunty Mugen engine giving him a speed advantage on what few straights there were. Berger had been watching them from behind for a while, but came in for his stop on lap 32, 9.3 seconds, not bad for a half load of fuel, and rejoined 9th behind Verstappen and Blundell. So on lap 35, with half distance approaching, Schumacher led Hill by 40 seconds, with Coulthard third, Brundle and Alesi a few seconds behind him, duelling over fourth, and Verstappen in the last points position, with Blundell, Berger, Panis and Frentzen making up the top 10. Herbert's defences were finally breached on lap 36, not by Christian Fittipaldi, but by his own electrics, causing mild chaos as everyone including Coulthard piled past, while Johnny trailed into an escape road. The following lap, Schumacher came in from the lead, an 8.1 second stop putting him out still well ahead to the tune of 15.6 seconds, but meaning he would need to make that third stop after all. Frentzen came a cropper at the same place as his teammate, finding a gearbox full of neutrals and ending up pointing the wrong way. He kept it running and did a spin turn, but after a few more laps it repeated the performance, and that was his and Sauber's day over. Brundle and Alesi, now joined by Verstappen, were wending their way through traffic, and as Berger chased them, trying to get back into the points, he had a big wobble at turn 2 and let a grateful Panis past, as Fittipaldi made his only stop, followed by Zanardi in his ailing but still running Lotus, still dead last. Brundle managed to put the recalcitrant Beretta between himself and Alesi, and set off in pursuit of Coulthard on the podium, which in turn allowed Verstappen to get right on Alesi's tail. The young Monegasque completed his collection of Ferrari fist waves as Alesi came through, only to slam the door on Verstappen and stay ahead of him for the whole lap, before coming in for his second fuel stop on lap 44. Brundle had by now caught up to Coulthard, a sight to cheer Ron Dennis's heart, while David Brabham was the latest driver to spin at turn 2, but kept things going without losing 13th place. Brundle made his second stop on lap 47, followed by Coulthard next time around, and the pair rejoined in the same order but now behind the Alesi-Verstappen battle. Hill came in on lap 51, a good stop, followed by Alesi and Verstappen in together and out together, and both rejoining behind Coulthard and Brundle, so Schumacher was 40 seconds ahead of Hill with one more stop to make. Everyone else had done all the pitting they were going to do, and it was a straight race for the last 26 laps till the finish. Schumacher duly made his third and final stop, a flawless 6.8 seconds, putting him out still with 20 seconds in hand over Hill, the only two drivers still on the lead lap. Brundle was pressing the young Scot ahead of him, but couldn't quite overcome the power advantage of the Renault V10, and he would instead have to rely on years of experience to try and pressure Coulthard into a mistake. Alesi's race, meanwhile, ended with 17 laps to go when he sprang an oil leak, and Pierluigi Martini later spun off on his oil. Coulthard lost his back end as he understeered round turn 5 and hit a bump at just the wrong angle, going hard into the barriers backwards, but while the back of the Williams didn't look very healthy, its occupant was fine. So with Alesi and Coulthard out, that meant Brundle was now third and Verstappen fourth, with Berger fifth and Blundell now up into the points but chased by Panis. Brundle couldn't get too excited just yet though, as Schumacher came round to put a second lap on him, because the Peugeot techs were looking worriedly at his engine temperatures and hung out a pit sign advising him to back off a bit. There wasn't much danger of anyone catching either Hill or Schumacher, but the rest of the points were starting to look like they might be up for grabs, as Verstappen bore down on a cruising Brundle, with Berger likewise charging in pursuit of the second Benetton, while Panis was half a second behind Blundell. The Tyrrell shortly found itself as the meat in a Ligier sandwich as he approached Eric Bernard to lap him. Eric, good team player that he was happily holding Mark up, while Olivier dodged this way and that looking for an opening. He nearly made it through on lap 72, but Blundell held the line. They both moved up a place when Berger's pneumatics ran out of air with just 3 laps to go, while Brundle had put his foot down a bit and unlapped himself from Schumacher as Verstappen was getting uncomfortably close. In fact, the Benetton team were perfectly aware that the Peugeot was overheating, and Schumacher pulled aside to let Verstappen charge through in pursuit, with now a couple of laps to go. Schumacher came home to take his 7th win of the season, with Hill 20 seconds or so behind. Blundell held on to 5th at the line with Panis in his wheel tracks, but it was disappointment for Brundle as his alternator gave out on the very last lap, allowing Jos Verstappen to take his first podium finish, the first ever by a Dutch driver, in just his 6th Grand Prix, to give Tom Walkinshaw a fine gift for his 46th birthday. Brundle would have to make do with 3 points for 4th place and a lift back to the pits on the back of a LaRousse. There were 14 classified finishers, though Brundle, Berger and Fittipaldi were all walking in from various parts of the track, with the last runner Zanardi, who'd plugged away to finish 5 laps down. It had been a crushing victory for Benetton, who'd beaten Williams both on the track and in the pits, and Schumacher might well look overjoyed, as he always did, extending his championship lead over Hill to 31 points, with the prospect of a 2-race ban still hanging over him, while Williams clawed their way back towards Ferrari, who had double DNF'd for the first time this year in the constructors' standing, and McLaren's disappointment might be slightly mollified as they managed to move ahead of the unlucky Jordan team. Some idiot with a couple of Union Jacks on a very long flagpole seemed intent on putting out the eyes of Hill, Schumacher or both, but no harm seemed to have been done. So in 2 weeks' time it was the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa-Francorchamps, a happy hunting ground for Schumacher in the past, but also a favourite with British fans who would be there in numbers to roar on Hill as he tried to keep his championship hopes alive.